Okay, Jono's up. Jump right into it. John, I had his quarterback, which is Philip Rivers, ranked 11. I don't like Rivers at all this year, but considering where you got him, I mean, you got him in the 7th round. All the top flight guys were gone, and I felt John did a really good job up until then, the first 6 rounds. So for where he got him, not bad, but I do have him ranked as the 11th best quarterback. Now, again, if you haven't watched some of the other guys' draft grades, 11 doesn't mean that they're bad. 10 other guys have to go in front of him. That's just where I rank him in a 12-man league. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm not a fan of Rivers this year. Running backs, I have him ranked 4th. He took C.J. Anderson in the 1st round, then DeMarco Murray and LeGarrette Blount. Those are his starters. Those are 3 really good starters. So I think 4 is definitely a strong ranking, and that's where he deserves to be. Now, C.J. Anderson, I know that most magazines and most rankings had him very high in the 1st round. He's a Peyton Manning running back, of course, but losing Ryan Clady was a big deal in Denver, and I've read where they feel like Denver has the worst offensive line in football, going to be playing some good teams like the Chiefs with good run defenses, especially if we can get Dontaria Poe back. So I'm not the biggest fan of C.J. Anderson. I see why other people are, but he had half a season last year. Before that, a bit of a journeyman, I think. To be honest, before last year, I don't know much about him. I believe he was in Denver the year before. I don't know when he was drafted. I don't know how old he is, to be honest, but not a big fan of Anderson. Now, DeMarco Murray, I love. I know not most people, a lot of people don't. They're really afraid of the carries that he had last year. I think the last time somebody had that many carries was Larry Johnson, because DeMarco Murray, I don't know how many carries he had, but he had like 450 touches in 16 games. That's insane. And DeMarco Murray has a history of injuries, so people were just shocked that he got through 16 games, let alone having 450 touches. But he also carried the Cowboys into the playoffs. The reason, not the reason, but a reason why Dez was so good, Dez Bryant, is because of DeMarco Murray. But even giving all that, I still like Murray a lot this year. I think there was one team that he could have gone to. He's not going to have the numbers he had last year, but if he misses 20% of his production from last year, he's still the top 3 running back. I mean, that's how good he was. And I think Philadelphia is the only team that, including Dallas, the only team he could have gone to have the same kind of fantasy impact. So, I think Murray is a great pick. I love where he got him. He got him in the 2nd round, the number 16 overall, and that could be a steal. And I know Ryan Matthews is going to be involved. I know that Sproles will get his catches. Murray's touches are going to go down, but that's a good thing for Murray because it's going to keep him healthy. And he's running behind the 2nd best offensive line in football, and teams are going to have to gear for the pass. So they're not going to know, do we need to gear for the run or the pass? So that's going to help him even more. And I love DeMarco Murray this year. I considered taking him as my 1st round pick, or actually my 2nd round pick, because I was taking Dez all the way. And then LeGarrette Blount. LeGarrette Blount's going to have 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns this year. I don't think we're going to have that crap that New England usually does with their running backs. I think they let him go to Pittsburgh because he wanted more money, and then they got him back for the league minimum. They got him back for less than what they were offering before he went to Pittsburgh, and they love him. New England just didn't want to pay anybody except for Tom Brady, but they're going to use him, and they love him, and he's going to have a really good season. If he had 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns this year, I know he's going to miss the first. Is it the first game or 2 games? I think it's just the first game. I mean, but 12 and 12 is possible for Blount. So if you combine Blount with Murray, who I think is going to have 14 touchdowns. So 12 plus 14 is 26. And then C.J. Anderson, I think, can chip in 10 touchdowns. 36 touchdowns out of his running backs. I mean, that's pretty damn good. So running backs core, I have him ranked number 4. He could have gone higher than that, actually. So, okay, receivers. I have his receiver core ranked number 4. I have Mike Evans and DeAndre Hopkins. So those are, I assume that his starters are going to be Murray, C.J. Anderson, Blunt, and then his receivers, Mike Evans and DeAndre Hopkins. Now, Evans, most people love. I'm not a huge fan of Evans this year. I think he takes a step back. I think he was a bit touchdown dependent last year, but I still think he's a fine player. But Hopkins I love. I think this is going to be his breakout year where he can establish himself. He's not going to be a Dez Bryant or a Calvin Johnson, but he can start to get into that upper tier 2 conversation right behind those guys, like maybe in the AJ Green. That's kind of where I see AJ Green, right in that area. And I don't see, other than his quarterback, which isn't great, but I don't see why he can't be in that conversation, because he's a real talent. He's not in the best situation, but he's not in the worst situation either. I think Brian Hoyer, remember Brian Hoyer had Josh Gordon when Josh Gordon had 1,600 yards, and so he's capable of getting him the ball. So I don't think the quarterback situation is that big of a deal, not as big a deal as a lot of people make of it. So I think Hopkins is going to be great. And then his tight end, I have him ranked 7th, Jason Witten. Now Witten, I didn't like him at all last year. Witten's kind of a boring pick. He's probably the most boring pick in all of fantasy. But without, we don't know who the running backs are going to be. Like, are they going to run as much as they did last year? Are they going to try and do that? If it doesn't work, they're going to have to go to the pass. They play in a division where there's going to be more passing. When you're playing Philadelphia or when you're playing Washington, when you're playing the Giants, you're going to have to pass the ball to win. And Witten is very capable of reeling in, 800-900 yards and 7-8 touchdowns. So I think Witten will be fine. So that's a pretty solid pick. So and especially where you got him, you got Witten in the 8th round. That's not bad at all. So. Let's see. I'll go to his starters. I have his starters as a B+. So pretty good starters. What brings him down a little, and you'll see this in the overall grade and the playoff seed that I think he's going to have. I do think he's a playoff team. But what brings him down is Phillip Rivers. I don't think Rivers is going to have more than 26 touchdowns. In a 12-man league, I think you got to have a quarterback with 28 to 33 touchdowns. And if I had to guess, I'm gonna say 24 touchdowns for Rivers, and that does bring him down because that does make a difference. So then you do have the 1-game suspension from Blunt, so that means he's going to have to start someone like Knile Davis or Danny Woodhead. So that's a B+ for his starters is my grade. For his full team, it's a C+ because that includes his bench. Now his bench isn't bad. He's got Knile Davis. I think Knile Davis is the second most important backup in football. I think number 1 is Ryan Matthews, but Knile Davis is not bad. Danny Woodhead is wildly underrated. So he has a nose for the goal line, and I think he is going to have an impact this year. So that's a decent backup. And you pair him with Phillip Rivers on that team. He took James White from New England, which is a handcuff to Blunt, so that was smart to do. So that's not bad. I don't think White's going to have an impact, but I see what he was going after. He's got Deshaun Jackson to back up Evans and Hopkins. So Deshaun Jackson is very big play dependent. That's pretty much all he does. I don't like Deshaun Jackson at all, but I do like Kirk Cousins, so maybe he can make him a little bit more valuable than I think that he is right now. And Michael Floyd. I think Michael Floyd has a big bounce back year with Carson Palmer. Now I'm going to assume health, so I'm going to assume Palmer's going to be healthy for the whole season. We'll see if that happens, but that's my assumption. And if he does, I think he leads Arizona in receiving yards and touchdowns. I think he can have a nice 7-8 touchdown season. So those are his backups. I give his full team a C+. And I'm sorry, he also has Teddy Bridgewater, who I think is going to take that next step forward in his development. So Rivers and Bridgewater is the quarterback. So C+ for his full team, B+ for his starters. Overall draft grade is a B-, which is good. That's a playoff team. I have him seeded 7th with a 7-6 record. I have 3 or 4 teams with a 7-6 record. The bottom 3 or 4. I'll have to double check to see if it is 3 or 4. But 7 seeded, 7 wins. That's a nice solid team. I don't. There's really no pieces to trade for a quarterback. Someone that's on the waiver wire, if you were to pick up, just have a year out of nowhere. that would definitely help quite a bit. But I'm just not high on Rivers, and that's the only if he had someone a little bit better than Rivers, I'd have him seated like 4th or 5th. So I think that's a real good team by John. I think it's a really good draft. I saw him looking in the magazine. I saw him looking at the rankings, and I think he put together a good team. So, well done, John. And on to Ron is next.